Welcome to Reaching Vulnerable Voting Populations. I'm Luca Flores, Deputy Director of the Future of California Elections. Welcome, and we're going to get started now. Just some background on folks. We are a network, and the members of the Future of California Elections work together to identify priorities and projects that advance the principles established when the group was founded in 2011. We work to modernize elections and expand participation while serving the needs of all voters, including underrepresented voters, voters with disabilities, and limited English proficient voters. Each year, FOS members identify key priorities to advance our shared mission and work collaboratively with partners across California to strengthen our democracy. First up, before we begin the main event, what I want to do is go ahead and give everyone a preview of one of the projects that we have in play right now. It's currently in progress. It's a short video that brings together many of the messages that we want to get out to voters. It's only about 8 seconds, but it's going to give you an idea of what we're trying to do using images that we have developed previously for our social media toolkit. And if we can get that up and played, you'll be able to take a look at it and we'll move on. So as I said, very short, but it gives you an idea of what we're shooting for. I'm particularly a big fan of the bear and the way his ears wiggle. But what we're looking for actually among our network is for once the video has come out with the first draft, for folks to come in and give us some feedback, reviews, that sort of thing, so we can get the video up to the standard that anyone can use it to pass on messaging to our communities in California. So with that, we'll move on to the next point of business, which is the panel format. This is a little different than what we usually do. We have 6 panelists joining us today. They're all from nonprofit organizations, and they all focus on specific communities. It's unusual, but I think it's necessary at this point to be able to hear about the best practices in messaging of people who are working directly with these populations that are facing obstacles and challenges in the best of times. And now that we're facing a pandemic, being able to support them and get them the information they need is even more important and more vital. I also want to point out, too, that even though many of these organizations contain people under a large umbrella of one descriptor, all of these populations are diverse in their own way, that you will find different types of people within each group. So that's another aspect of this webinar that we wanted to bring to the forefront, that even though you're dealing with messaging with a specific focus, you have to tailor it to meet the demands and needs of your community and the different members, and how some of those approaches may help others in reaching your similarly diverse communities. So a Q&A feature will be available during this panel where you can pose questions for any of our presenters. Even if we don't get to your questions, we're going to be sure to send them onto whichever panelist you requested to answer, if not one or more. We're more than happy to do that. So having said that, let's introduce our first panelist. This is in alphabetical order. So our first one is Luis Campillo. He is the Los Angeles Regional Manager for AARP California, based at the Pasadena office. Now, he leads the LA team of staff and volunteers to build and strengthen AARP's multicultural and member relevance through advocacy, community outreach, volunteer growth, through meaningful engagement, and greater brand awareness. Luis also serves as the 2020 Census and Voter Education Lead for AARP California, and has statewide responsibility for volunteer management and engagement strategies. We're going to give each panelist a couple of minutes to introduce themselves and the work that the organizations are doing. Luis?
Thank you, Lupe, and thank you to everyone for joining this important conversation. AARP is the nation's largest nonpartisan nonprofit organization focused and really dedicated to making sure that those who are 50 and over can choose how they live as they age. We have about 38 million members across the country. We have 3.3 million members here in California, and we really work to strengthen communities and also advocate for the issues that matter most to families, and that includes health, security, financial stability, and personal fulfillment. So we know that the 2020 elections are going to be like no other. And then in the next slide, you will see that a lot of the focus of our Protect Voters 50 Plus is about protecting that particular demographic, but also showcasing the power of the 50 plus as a voting group. So we know that they have been an incredible part of the electorate in previous occasions, and they also have gone from one party to the next. So in 2016, they gave the presidency to Donald Trump. In 2018, they voted for Democrats, and they gave Nancy Pelosi the speakership back. So we know that they're going to be influential. Ironically, our research shows that a lot of 50 plus voters think that it's going to be the younger folks, those who are 50 and under, who are going to be deciding the election, which is fine because we know that we live intergenerational families, intergenerational communities, and the issues are important to the 50 plus, like health and financial security, are important to all voters. So if we go to the next slide, we all know that older adults and communities of color have been impacted by COVID-19, and we really want to make sure that our constituency knows they can vote safely in person or from home, as well as voting early to avoid any issues. In the next slide, you will see that this year we know that the multicultural voting bloc will represent at least a third of the electorate. So we're really doing our best to communicate with everyone and everyone has that information. In the next slide, you will see our national goals here in California, which is again, to be a champion for the 50 plus, to make sure that they know how to vote in these upcoming elections, to make sure that we're building relationships with elected officials and influencers such as yourselves, to make sure that the issues that they care about, like Social Security, Medicare, long-term care, are top of the agenda. And then also just continuing to be a trusted resource of information. And lastly, you will see that we'll use all of our platforms in the next slide. You will see that we will use all of our platforms in English and Spanish to communicate that message to voters not only here in California, but across the country. And I really look forward to the Q&A session of the conversation today.
Great, thank you, Luis. And I think we're all cognizant of the issue of older folks who are oftentimes more heavily involved in the political process are facing an especially large challenge this year because of the pandemic. So thank you very much for that. So we'll move on to also a quick note. We're attempting to get our closed captioning up. We are having some difficulty with it, but we're trying to get it going as soon as possible. So I want to apologize now for the delay in that. But now our next panelist is Samuel Molina, Fresno, California native, served in the U.S. Marine Corps Reserve, if I get that correctly. I am a veteran as well, so I always like to point out the past service of other veterans. He leads the LA team of staff and volunteers to build, he joined Amelia Vuelta in April 2014 and leads the California operations as a state director. Samuel's work includes advocating for paid family leave, increasing voter participation, environmental protections, immigrant rights, and health care for all. He received the Latinx Community Leader Health Equity Award from the Latino Coalition for Healthy California and the Chispa Award from LULAC, two significant awards. Samuel, thank you for joining us, and take it away.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. As you mentioned, I am Samuel Molina, the California State Director. We are a national, nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, and we work in a C3 and C4 capacity, advocating for immigrant rights, healthcare, education, workers' rights, education, and the environment. Here in California, we're based in Fresno, Modesto, and Riverside, focusing on Latino dense populations and trying to increase Latino civic engagement. We were founded as a result of Proposition 187, which passed here in California in 1994. And our founders had decided that the Latino immigrant community was no longer going to be taken advantage of or be targeted in such a way by political candidates like then Governor Pete Wilson. So Mi Familia Vota was a result of that, and we've been changing California ever since. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Next up is Adria Orr, Senior Project Coordinator for the Voting Rights and Census Team at Asian Americans Advancing Justice Asian Law Caucus. Her work includes leading the poll monitoring program and providing community education on voting rights related topics. She previously worked in online fundraising with interest in mechanisms of democratizing philanthropy, particularly crowdfunding and peer-to-peer fundraising. Adria is a Bay Area native and spent a decade on the East Coast in Rhode Island, Washington, D.C., and New York City before returning to California. Adria, take it away.
Thanks, Lupe. Yes, so Asian Americans Advancing Justice Asian Law Caucus is the first legal and civil rights organization in this country founded to serve the low-income Asian Pacific American community. But today our work more broadly focuses on issues that affect low-income refugee and immigrant populations. So, for both API communities and MEMSA communities. Our programs cover housing rights, immigration and immigrant rights, labor and employment issues, civil rights and hate violence, national security, criminal justice reform, and voting rights. But my team specifically, our Voting Rights and Census program, works to expand access to our state's democratic systems for APIs and other immigrant communities, specifically limited English-speaking Californians and others who have been historically disenfranchised. So our goal is to really ensure full participation, not just in voting, but in census and redistricting other democratic systems and institutions. In particular, what that means, one of our big focuses is looking at how we can close the participation gap that exists in our state elections. So we know that Asian and Latinx voters vote at much lower rates than other groups. And so a lot of our team's work has focused on trying to eliminate potential barriers to voting, in particular for voters who might have limited English proficiency. So that includes working to expand the number of languages that are covered for elections language access, advocacy to Secretary of State and county elections offices. I think in particular this November during COVID and the pandemic situation, just trying to make sure that limited English proficient voters don't fall through the gaps, and trying to create resources for our community partners to put accurate information out there. There's a lot going out there about the election and it can get pretty confusing. So trying to create resources that will support that. And then finally, I just want to mention that we do run one of the biggest poll observing programs in the state. So since 2016, we've sent hundreds of volunteers into the field to help make sure that voters are receiving the language access support they're entitled to, as well as looking for accessibility for voters with disabilities and other kind of voting mechanisms. So this is a really big part of our program, just trying to make sure that, again, these vulnerable voters are getting access to everything they're entitled to. But I can talk more on that later. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Adria. Also, I want to point out, if you can view captions via a link that has been placed in the chat function. So if you want or need to be able to see captions, click on that link. It's in the chat box on the side of your Zoom panel, and you'll be able to view it there. And that actually is a nice transition to our next panelist, Russell Rawlings, statewide community organizer at California Foundation for Independent Living Centers, which is an organization providing a network of California's 28 independent living centers. He is a facilitator of the, I hope I'm saying this, DO network, Disability Organizing Network, a statewide network of disability rights activists, advocates, and organizers. He also serves on Sacramento's Voter Accessibility Advisory Committee, and he's former chair of the Sacramento City Disability Advisory Commission. Russell, it's all yours.
Thanks, Lupe. Hi, everyone. My name is Russell Rawlings. I'm statewide community organizer at CFILC. And our mission is to increase access and equal opportunity for people with disabilities by building the capacity of independent living centers. And independent living centers are places of empowerment for people with disabilities. I like to call it the place where a person with a disability can go to make a plan to live their best life. We provide resources and connections for people in the community to be able to access their communities fully and live in the communities that they desire. Next slide, please. And part of my role is I am facilitator of the DO Network, Disability Organizing Network. It's a statewide network of disability rights advocates and organizers. And we would love to have you all join us for our news updates and to just connect with us on a lot of our activities. We are not a disability only space. We are a space where everyone can join, because we are truly an intersectional population. Next slide, please. And our strategy this year has been somewhat unique, as I'm sure most of you have also had unique strategies this year. A lot of it has been, of course, started off with adapting and reacting to the new reality that we're in. For us here at CFILC, a lot of this was kind of just the way we were doing things. We've always worked in remote fashion and connected with a large number of people throughout the state. So technologies like Zoom were things we were already employing. So we had a little bit of a heads up on how to keep things going. However, what we've done a lot of is having to support people that don't in the local communities, the independent living centers that are serving communities and people with limited internet access and really just honestly limited access to communication that's not face-to-face. So it has been a lot of transition for us in thinking through how to build these networks that we've had out into the community. And we're still constantly thinking through that, and really happy that Future California Elections is doing this model of work as well, because really what it does is it opens it up. It makes it more accessible. So before, when we were meeting in rooms and attending specialized conferences, it's really difficult to access. So we're really happy to be doing this. Our strategy this year has been to create and maintain a voting and civic participation work group. Those happen on a monthly basis. And our strategy for November has been to develop a series of 3 webinars, one of which happened in July, and that's Building Your Disability Advocacy Toolkit, which focused on basics of advocacy and using the VAC, the Voter Accessibility Advisory Committee. And next, we're doing, toward the end of this month, we're doing changes to voting in November, which will focus on a lot of the COVID changes and other access changes, and a real focus on remote accessible vote by mail, which is a really new thing. And then finally, we are closing out with an early October webinar on making a voting plan. We really want people with disabilities and others to plan for this year's election, because it's going to be so unique and they've got so many options, but you really want to think through what's best and most accessible and safest for you. And so we've got a link for our trainings. We'd love to have you all join us. The training page will be updated by the end of next week. And that's basically where we're at with our strategy. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Russell. And we will try to share some of those links in the chat box later on in the webinar, but you can always contact us and we'd be happy to forward the information to you. And I'm glad to bring up the idea of intersectionality as far as the community you serve, because I think our next speaker is essentially the same situation. Nick Rainey is a fourth-year public affairs major at UCLA and the board chair for CalPERS Students. It's a nonprofit that works to protect the environment, fight food insecurity, and register voters. And you will have a wide variety of diversity within the college population. So Nick got involved in his freshman year, working on the successful campaign to commit the UC system to 100% clean electricity. I actually remember that happening, and has since helped win campaigns to make UCLA a certified bee-friendly campus and register 1,300 UCLA students to vote. So, Nick, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Lupe. So yeah, my name's Nick Riani, and I'm the board chair for CalPERC Students, the California Student Public Interest Research Group, and a fourth-year public affairs major at UCLA. CalPERC Students is part of a federation of student-run nonprofits called the Student Pergs. We were founded by students in the 1970s who saw that America has more problems than we should tolerate, and more solutions than we use. So they decided to pool their resources to hire staff who now provide us with the training, professional support, and resources we need to fight climate change, protect public health, revitalize our democracy, and more. Students have been at the forefront of change throughout history, and CalPERC Students has been a part of it, from working to get expiration dates on milk to just this summer getting the UCs to commit to phase out non-essential single-use plastics by 2030 to protect our oceans. Our New Voters Project is the largest nonpartisan youth voter outreach program in the country. Nationally, we've helped 2 million young people register to vote and made 2.5 million get out the vote contacts since our founding. In 2018 in California, we helped 6,000 students register to vote and made 500,000 get out the vote contacts. And as a result, at a number of our schools, voter turnout increased by over 200% since the 2014 midterm elections. Young people are the largest block of potential voters in the country, so we have the potential to elect leaders who will fight for our vision for our future if we vote. So we're working at schools across California to register, educate, and turn out thousands of students for the upcoming election.
Thank you, Nick, and my apologies for mispronouncing your last name. I'm going to blame it on my allergies. I'm going to blame everything on my allergies right now. So, next, and thank you again. So our next and last, but certainly not the least, panelist that we're introducing is Brittany Stone. Brittany, pronounce your last name for me.
Stonecipher.
Thank you, Brittany Stonecipher. She's a voting rights attorney at the ACLU of California, where she advocates to expand the franchise to all Californians and to reduce barriers to voting caused by the registration process. Since joining ACLU in 2019, she has fought with the Grassroots Coalition to restore voting rights to people with criminal convictions, utilizing prior experience in reforming criminal justice policy. Before ACLU, Brittany coordinated a statewide campaign to eliminate criminal administrative fees that trap re-entering people and their families in cycles of poverty. Also spent 5 years as staff attorney with legal services for prisoners with children. Leading that economic justice work, she helped make California the first state in the nation to stop suspending the licenses of drivers who missed a payment in traffic court. With that, Brittany, take it away.
Thank you so much, Lupe, and thank you to FOS for hosting this panel and for inviting me to speak. So generally this year, the ACLU's voting rights work has been focused on making sure that voters don't have to choose between protecting their health and exercising their right to vote. So over the last several months, ACLU affiliates across the US have been prioritizing work to break down barriers to vote by mail, especially. Because for most voters, vote by mail is a common sense solution to democratic engagement at a time when we're fighting a pandemic by exercising physical distancing. But as Adria mentioned earlier, not all voters have equal access to vote by mail. And the core of our work is about closing representation and voter engagement gaps for historically underrepresented people. And in past elections, vote by mail has not been used as frequently by voters of color, low-income voters, unhoused folks, young people, or people who need language access and disability services. So in California, we've been working to protect adequate and safe in-person voting options, as well as vote by mail, to give people as many options to cast their ballot as they need. And we also want to make sure that voters know their rights and have accurate information about the election, because there is a lot of misinformation out there right now, and because not an equal amount of outreach is done to all voters. So on the screen, you can see there is a Know Your Rights information link. So the ACLU of Northern California has put together some Know Your Rights information for this November. Those are available in English and in Spanish. And in general, during a time when we are calling for an end to institutional oppression in all its forms, and when Black and Brown people are being hit the hardest by the pandemic, we're continuing to work to break down voter suppression for people impacted by the criminal legal system. I'll reference this work more later, but I wanted to highlight that letmevotca.org is a resource that you can use to find out information about voting rights for people with convictions, as well as a new resource called Voting in California Jails, a Community Toolkit. Those are available in both English and Spanish as well, and the link is on the website. There's also a resource bank that goes with that jail voting toolkit. And you can learn more about Prop 17, which I will mention later on in the presentation as well, which we're working a lot on at yeson17.vote.
Great, thank you, Brittany. Okay, so with that, now I'll let the panelists introduce. We're going to start with the first roundtable question. And I'm going to ask this question in this order to each of you. Nick first, Luis, Russell, then pivot to Adria, Samuel, and Brittany. The first question is, how has your outreach and communications changed in the past 8 to 9 months of the pandemic? And I want to start with Nick, because there's so much of the news nowadays about the problems that colleges and universities are having in getting their students on campus, to stay on campus, to stay safe while they're learning, and then having to shift to virtual learning if it becomes too severe. So this clearly is going to have an impact on your work and how you're going to reach fellow students. So give us an idea of how and what happened in shifting your outreach to your constituency.
Yeah, I mean, personally, as you know, as a student, I know I'm gonna miss like running into my friends on campus and having class with them, as well as working with my fellow organizers in person. As an organization, we have been working to find new ways to reach students. Starting in spring, we were able to run a pretty successful New Voters Project in spring to get ready for this election, as well as organizing on our other campaigns and a summer internship program. So we were able to sort of use that to develop a new, sort of apply our old model to this new world. And for this upcoming election, the biggest impact on our in-person tactics are our two biggest in-person tactics, which were class announcements and tabling to help students register and turn out. We can't table on campus because we want to keep ourselves and our community safe. So we've decided to do all of our work virtually for the duration of the pandemic. And UCLA and a number of other campuses are completely virtual anyway. Class announcements we're still doing, but they're more difficult to do well over Zoom. But what stayed the same is that students are more likely to register and turn out when asked by a peer and when they're contacted multiple times. So what we've added to continue using that to turn out the vote is expanding our use of relational organizing, or asking people we know to act. So for example, over the summer, we were able to collect over 3,000 pledge to votes from California students by asking our friends to pledge to vote and ask their friends to pledge to vote as well. So that's one tactic that I think can be really helpful in a virtual world.
Great, thank you very much, Nick. Our next, to answer the question, will be Luis, your take on current efforts and how it's going?
Of course, so like so many of you, we had to pivot to the virtual perspective, to the virtual offerings, which was tough for us to do because so many of our volunteers and so many of our staff are so used to being in community, and being in community, that in-person interaction was really our bread and butter, and the best way to try to get resources and information to community. What we did was we shifted to telephone town halls. So being able to have weekly conversations, both nationally, locally, and statewide, and where we brought experts to answer questions and provide information and resources. One of the things that the pandemic has sort of highlighted, like Russell mentioned earlier, was the broadband access and digital literacy. So while we have older adults that are really good with technology, who have broadband access, there's a lot of people who don't, and a lot of people who, even if have access to the technology, don't know how to use it. And we know that that's a concern in underserved communities. So we've been trying to do our best to reach out to our members in our constituency while figuring out how we can do texting, because one of the limitations for teletown halls is that we depend on lines. And unfortunately, we know that a lot of people are cutting the cord. But we have found out that Facebook and Instagram have been good ways to share information, particularly Facebook, where we do live events, we do social promotions, and Twitter as well. So we've been trying to find the right mix of those telephonic, digital, and social media outlets to continue that conversation, and also through our publications when we can.
Right, thank you, Luis. And I think that brings up some important points, especially when we're talking about equity and broadband access. There are a lot of people that don't or can't get it, and that affects college students as well, and folks in the disabled community. And so that leads us into Russell's take on this. And you did, as Luis pointed out, you brought up earlier about how in some ways access has been increased because of the situation we're in. So, you know, if you can absolutely put a positive spin on it, that's great. But the negatives are important too, I think. So take it away.
Sure, and thank you, Luis, for bringing up, you know, yes, in some ways, this new reality has opened up the playing field for a lot of folks. There have actually been some wonderful commentary on how COVID honestly opened up a lot of economic employment activities for people with disabilities that were a ready and willing workforce that was ready to work remotely and actually kind of fighting for access for those kind of reasonable accommodations. And now we're living in a reality where these things are necessary.
Right.
So there is some positive here. However, I want to highlight and underscore the challenge, which is that people that are on the other side of the digital divide, those who do not have internet access, are in a real challenging position. In fact, CFILC's program, the Digital Access Project, a program where we help people with low income connect to low cost internet throughout the state, has just exploded in its activity. We get somewhere north of 100 calls a day now for people looking for access. So we know that this is a need. We are doing our best to try to be a part of the solution and connecting people with low income programs that all of the major internet providers are required to provide. So there are options out there. They can be challenging to navigate, but we encourage everyone to seek them. And I'll, after I'm done with my comment here, I'll put a link in the chat to the program. But I also want to say that really honestly, even though professionally at CFILC very little changed, I came from an independent living center. I started my position in April. So I made the transition during the stay-at-home order period. And I can tell you it's very real that these independent living centers that serve people face-to-face, more than, I'd say, almost 100% of their work prior to May or March, was face-to-face. So it's been a real challenge, and a lot of our work has been supporting them and helping them do things like learn how to run a Zoom meeting, learn how to have these community meetings. And it's, it can be very challenging in a local city, but it's very possible. And I think as we become the model and continue to train and help others learn how to do this, we can really make a deep impact. So even though we're at home doesn't mean that we have to be isolated, and that we can still have the same kind of interaction. So that's really what we've worked on.
Great, thank you. Next up, Adria. And I do want to point out that this is something we had actually spoken of before, is that your organization actually works in tandem with other smaller organizations, and many of them specific language communities. So there is, again, that kind of intersectionality that's occurring there with dealing with challenges that are significant in the best of times. So I imagine those challenges have risen more. Can you tell us more about your organization's work in the past few months?
Yeah, thanks, Lupe. Yeah, I think just as you mentioned, our community is the API community is an incredibly diverse group with a lot of different language needs and cultural contexts sort of within that umbrella, which even in, quote, normal times makes outreach and communications challenging in a lot of different ways. And I think as others mentioned, we previously did incorporate a lot of in-person outreach to target specific communities and language minority groups, because that's how you contact that's how you can connect with the community, right? Is you go where they are. And now it's just a lot harder to do that. Everyone's at home. And I think a lot of the folks that we would have targeted previously through those in-person events are exactly the kinds of folks who are maybe a little bit harder for us to target through like digital or online tactics. So I think within our social media and digital strategies, we've tried to include messaging that really tries to motivate people who are active on social media to not just, absorb the information themselves, but to also share that information with their families and friends who might not use technology as much. So really trying to get them to sort of be hubs of information and push it out. More than ever, I think we're trying to partner with ethnic media who do have more targeted audiences within specific groups. That's something that we used in our census work, and that we'll hopefully be able to bring into our elections work as well. It's something that's always important, but more so now than ever. And then, as you mentioned, we have a lot of partner organizations who we support with technical assistance and trying to provide resources and support for. And I think one of the challenges is in the past, you could have this pretty broad network and put flyers in waiting areas, or put things in sort of provide information in sort of a more passive way so that people could pick it up as the conversation kind of came up. And now we need to get a little more buy-in for people to kind of be more actively pushing this information out through their networks and through the different channels they have for their communities. And then I think the last thing I'll mention is that if you have capacity and funding, which those are two big things that I think a lot of us struggle with, we also have tried to do some targeted mailers. So, that's really difficult in some ways because you're only as good as your data on, where folks are living and what language needs they have. But if you do have that data, then that can be a way to kind of get translated materials or, in-language materials to specific communities. So I would say it's just kind of been compounding on a lot of challenges that existed previously and trying to adjust the messaging and the tactics that we use. But a lot of it is just experimentation, I think, as many of us are seeing, and hopefully it works.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are in the same boat. And I really want to point out how you described it as both passive and active outreach. That active outreach seems to be a tactic that people are having to adopt. There's really no choice, because you can't leave flyers in the waiting room. You can't put things someplace where somebody can pick them up, because that's no longer safe. So thank you for that. Our next panelists to answer this question will be Samuel. And again, this is another instance where I want to point out, even though it is ostensibly a Latino, Latinx organization, we are not a monolithic group of people. We're very different in many ways due to background, experience, that sort of thing. So, Samuel, with that in mind, take it away.
So focusing on outreach and how our communication has changed to increase voters throughout the state and actually throughout the nation, we have been partnering with organizations or media groups like Univision and Entravision to increase voter registration throughout the nation. So in early August, we actually created a hotline, and every Tuesday from about 5 to 8 p.m., individuals can call that hotline and get registered to vote by one of our staff members or volunteers using our voter registration link on our website. COVID has had a big impact not only on my organization but on everyone else's. And where we were registering thousands of students in high schools throughout the Central Valley and Inland Empire, that came to an immediate halt once March 12th came around here in California. And so we are changing our tactics. We've increased our social media presence on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, how much postings we're doing per week just in relation to election, and also providing that voter registration link. What we're doing now is we're gearing up for National Voter Registration Day, and we plan on targeting some high schools in our regions to get in their classrooms, talk to them about the importance of their vote, and register them to vote, again using our website and that link that's available, so that we don't lose them, right? Because right now, COVID has taken away our ability to go into the classrooms, go into the naturalization ceremonies that we were doing. Again, having a large impact on registering voters throughout the state. So those are some of the things that we're doing to make sure that everyone's participating, getting registered to vote in time for the November 3rd election.
Great, thank you. Brittany, clearly you have a history in working for folks dealing with the justice system. Tell us about how your outreach and communications changed, but in relation to that project that the ACLU has recently completed and continuing efforts to reach those particular populations.
Sure. So in many ways, our outreach and communications work has changed because of COVID. So in all the ways that everyone has already highlighted, a lot of our work has shifted to online platforms, and there are positives and negatives to that. But we found that with enough Zoom know-how, creativity, and outreach, you can still reach a lot of people, and you can bring more people who might not have been able to attend in-person events into the process. So one example, I mentioned Prop 17 before. So Prop 17 is a ballot measure that will restore voting rights for people who have finished their prison sentences. And the Yes on Prop 17 campaign, which we're part of along with about 10 other civil rights and grassroots social justice organizations, has been doing virtual activist trainings every other Friday at 1 p.m. and everyone is welcome and invited to join. Those trainings have had a new cast of speakers each time, including directly impacted people, to help those presentations come to life, to have different people so that people can join a new activist training for the first time, or they can come to each of them and still have it be interesting. We're empowering supporters from across the state and across the country to support the fight to restore voting rights through those trainings. And the campaign is also hosting virtual fundraiser parties and making sure that supporters have a lot of content to share on their social media. So again, you can find that information on yeson17.vote. But other challenges that we've been experiencing, you mentioned that project, Lupe. So we've just released a new toolkit that I referenced earlier, and that's on letmevoteca.org. That was a joint project between ACLU of Northern California and Southern California and League of Women Voters and several of other partners. So incarcerated people right now are in more danger and are more isolated than ever, which also means that in many cases, the already fragile systems that allow people in jails to register to vote and to cast their ballots have been broken down. There aren't visitors allowed in, and there's not a lot of information that is going through as quickly as it was before, which was not very quickly. So the Jail Voting Toolkit is meant to be a resource to help activists and government agencies alike to overcome some of those obstacles. Things like mailing in information to people who are on the inside, empowering people who are incarcerated themselves to be inside organizers and to distribute voter registration information to other people who are incarcerated. So that toolkit has different models for how to do jail voter registration and engagement in jails. And there's a November 2020 cover letter that calls out specific models that will work better under this, this structure. And as I mentioned before, that's available in both English and Spanish. And it comes with a resource bank, including contact information, sample program materials, and lots of other good stuff.
Great. And stay right there, Brittany, because the next question is coming at you first. So the second question actually addresses the challenges, obstacles your communities are facing, right? So we've heard what we are all dealing with as people working in our particular positions, but the people that you're serving, the people that you're working for, what are they facing right now because of current conditions?
Yeah, in many ways, vulnerable people, people who have already faced various forms of structural oppression are being hit the hardest by the pandemic, and the barriers that they already experienced are just being magnified. So that's likely going to continue to be true when it comes to this November's election, even though we are all doing our best to minimize those disparities. So for instance, neighborhoods with people of color often have experienced long lines at polling places on election day in the past. And this November, election officials have experienced challenges in securing enough voting locations and enough poll workers, which could lead to long lines, again, which is obviously a particularly big concern when we're exercising physical distancing and trying to prevent transmission of COVID. Similarly, and Adria mentioned language access work before, my amazing co-worker at ACLU NorCal, Christina Fletes, and others have been fighting to make sure that lack of language access services doesn't prevent voters with limited English proficiency from being able to vote or to participate in the election planning process. So that means that ballots, election info and outreach, poll workers, election planning documents, community meetings about election planning, all of those need to be available in all the required languages for each community, for each county. And it's a lot of work to make sure that all of the counties have the resources that they need to translate those and to make sure that they're doing the right outreach to reach underrepresented voters and people who have limited English proficiency.
I'm going to shift course here. We've actually got a couple of questions coming into the Q&A section. I'm going to get to those as opposed to going with the questions I had planned. The first one is from Mr. David Dirks. A question to all participants that may work with people who are homeless. I think Ms. Stonesifer referenced the unhoused. Do you find that unhoused people are misinformed about address and ID requirements? And if so, what are some resources that you can share to help homeless people register and vote? So let me kick this question over to Russell first. Russell, do you have a take on that particular question?
Certainly, yeah. So a lot of our work does actually, a lot of our population, our disability community faces homelessness at a higher level than a lot of other populations. So I think that to answer the specific question about people being misinformed, I'm not sure that misinformation is happening nearly as frequently as maybe the information in general is not getting out, that people are able to use a geographic location as an address. However, I know that here in Sacramento County that the Sacramento Elections Office has put out some specifically targeted information to the community, and the Independent Living Center here in Sacramento County, Resources for Independent Living, has definitely made that information available. Of course, it's a little bit more challenging since folks can't walk into that office right now, but certainly I don't know that a lot of misinformation is going on. I think that the challenge remains, how do we make sure that the information is getting out? And the answer is that we need to work with allies and people that are direct service providers in our local area. So be sure to connect with local service providers and ensure that they have a plan as well to ensure that their communities are getting the information.
Great, thank you. Samuel, I'll pose the same question to you. Is Mi Familia Vota taking steps to reach the unhoused at the moment?
At this time,
Right.
as far as reaching the unhoused, we have not taken any steps towards that.
Let me take that question then to Nicholas. Students that may be, this is actually a problem that may be occurring among college students, that moving to go to college out of state and finding themselves either stuck or forced to return to home, which could pose a danger for their family. Have there been any special efforts as far as reaching out to those particular students who are facing that kind of crisis?
Yeah, I mean, we always would want to call, every student who we possibly can to make sure they're registered to vote at the right address. So we, are calling students who may have already pledged to vote, who expressed interest in volunteering with us to make sure that they're registered to vote at the right address to receive their vote by mail ballot and vote in person. I think that answers that.
Great, thank you. Let me go to Luis next. As far as unhoused people that AARP may serve, anything to add to efforts and outreach?
We are concerned because we know that older adults, and particularly here in the LA area and other parts of the state, unfortunately older adults, because of medical reasons and a number of other reasons, end up unhoused. So it's an issue that we're looking at policy-wise. So we've supported the building of accessory dwelling units. We're actually in the process of finalizing a housing white paper. But I think to Russell's point, I think the best way to make sure that the in-house homeless individuals have the information they need is to work with their service providers where they're getting meals or getting additional support. And we certainly have resource, but because of the pandemic, unfortunately, we cannot be out there giving out that information because we don't want to put our volunteers and our staff in harm's way.
Right. Thank you, Luis. Next, I'm going to go back to Brittany because, Adria, I want to end with you, at least with this question, because then that's going to lead us into another question that's come for you specifically. But first, Brittany, I would think that the unhoused issues may be a problem among the population you work with specifically as far as the criminal justice system. What are some of the techniques and some of the things that ACLU is doing to reach that particular segment of the population?
Yeah, so I think that there's a few different strategies. One is to make sure that people, again, have accurate information because there's a lot of misinformation about whether you can even vote if you don't have a residential address, which of course you can. You just need to set somewhere that you can receive mail as your mailing address if you want to receive a vote by mail ballot. But we've also been making sure that there are adequate in-person voting opportunities and that voting locations are placed in areas that are accessible where people who are unhoused are more often or are near places that are service providers so that people don't have to travel far in order to get to a voting location. For people who are re-entering from jail or prison and who are experiencing lack of housing services, that's a particularly challenging issue because they are kind of at the intersection of two forms of voter suppression. We've been trying to connect with communities that have a connection to people who are re-entering. So I recently did a presentation last week for Transitions Clinic that provides health services to people who are re-entering and people who are often experiencing homelessness to make sure that they can register people through their clinics. So yeah, providing people information where they're at and making sure that information is accurate.
Thank you. Adria, question to you.
Yeah, I don't think I have any regarding this topic. I don't think I have anything to add that my fellow panelists didn't cover, so I don't want to take up more time with that.
Great. So then let me throw this next question at you. That was specifically for you. What are some successful digital marketing campaign on social media for the AAPI community? And once you answer that, we'll close with our final question for everyone to answer.
Yeah, thanks. I can mention over the summer that ALC did a social media campaign related to the census that actually we're really happy with. It kind of had multiple lives, which we were kind of happy about. It sort of came back and a couple times, and basically that involved reaching out to different kind of like influencers within the API community and asking them to either use campaign graphics and content that we created, or create their own personal content and basically make a pitch to their followers about why they should complete the census. And we got really good response, maybe because everybody was locked up inside and didn't have anything better to do than to respond to requests. But we actually had good response from that, and it was a pretty successful campaign that we were happy with. So if you're curious, that is something that you'd be able to still see live on our social media accounts on Instagram and on Facebook, I believe.
Wonderful. So last question for everyone, and Adriel, I'm going to keep it on you so you can take up for the answer first. But this last question is, how do we work effectively with election officials in reaching our communities? And we have some election officials and administrators on viewing this webinar right now. So consider this as a chance to speak to them directly about the kind of needs that you folks are facing.
Yeah, I'll speak to the tactics that ALC has used in the past. So, I think we know that a lot of our elections officials really do have the best of intentions with regards to wanting to connect with our communities, but many of them aren't given the resources or just don't historically have the in-house expertise to really build out robust outreach programs. So one of the tactics that we use is, really trying to connect with election officials to provide suggestions for tactics they can try, to provide connections to partner organizations that we have, like if we're able to, for example, if they are trying to recruit bilingual poll workers from a specific language minority community, with the recent expansion of Section 14201 language coverage, we partnered with ACLU to provide information on requirements to county elections offices, again, paired with sort of best practices and some lists of community groups for those covered languages. So really trying to give them information and connections that that they can then use and execute on. You know, knowing they have limited resources, we just try to help them focus on how they can use those resources in the best ways they can. And then I think the other piece of it is we also really try to connect with our community-based partner organizations who are interested in voting or elections work, and try to help them access the different opportunities for feedback and engagement within the system. So I know it can feel like a really high barrier to entry for a lot of those spaces. A lot of people might not even know about them, or elections administration stuff can feel really technical. So, you know, we worked, for example, in a couple of ECA counties with community members to understand how to look at an EAP and provide feedback on it, you know, or to encourage folks to join VOC spaces and that kind of thing. So working from within the community to take advantage of the opportunities that elections offices are providing. So those are a couple of the tactics that I would mention.
Great, thank you. Same question to Samuel, working with election officials and to reaching your community.
Yeah, so working with elected officials, the way we can be effective is, you know, making sure that we're outreaching to them, letting them know that we're, you know, here for them to support them. I think, you know, of course, advising them on what your org is doing, providing them with materials, translation assistance if they need it. You know, I think that's one of the ways we're gonna be most effective in this election. Of course, you know, before Fresno County, for example, was able to secure all 53 of their voting sites, we were in contact with them to help them if they needed it, to help them find locations for the upcoming election. And I think we just need to, you know, stay open to that idea with working with our elected officials, keep those lines of communication open, and we'll be more successful that way.
Great, thank you. Luis, your take on working with election officials.
Of course. So I think one of the ways that these types of platforms where we can share our perspective and let them know where our individual constituencies come from are very helpful. Obviously, establishing those direct relationships. We've been working closely with the Secretary of State of California on both census and voter education efforts. So that has been really helpful. We also have been partnering with the San Diego Registrar of Voters, and we're planning to reach out to all of the registrars across California so that we can help amplify whatever education they're doing on the voting process. We also are promoting a partnership with Power the Polls. So to the point made earlier that a lot of people are still going to feel that they want to vote in person for whatever reason. And we want to make sure that we avoid those long waits that may happen if we don't have enough poll workers. And unfortunately, older adults, those who tend to work the polls, will not be able to do that. So really helping them find the future generation of poll workers, so we can make sure that everybody can participate safely if they decide to do so in person. But hopefully, people will vote by mail or drop it off. So that's how we are helping get the message out there.
Great, thank you. We're going to go a few minutes over time, but I think it's important to get everybody's take on this. Hopefully, fingers crossed, it's not going to be more than 5 minutes. But next person to answer that question, Russell, could you give us your take on working with election officials?
Sure. For us, it's a bit of a thinking through how we're working with supporting independent living centers to do this work. And our first webinar that we produced was actually just that, is how to build that relationship with an elections office. And we are very interested in making sure that our community has direct connections to the elections office. Of course, we have the voter accessibility advisory committees that exist in some areas, some counties that have developed them, but we're also hoping to train and educate people on how to develop them. It basically just starts with getting a bunch of interested folks together that are interested in disability access to to voting systems and having those conversations. I'm going to say too that remote accessible vote by mail is the biggest change to this election for our community. And 58 counties will now be providing this service to allow people to vote independently and privately and respond by mail. So that's really our biggest hurdle right now, is making sure that folks know that this is a resource that's available to them. They can print their ballot responses with their printer at home and then return them in their election envelope. So, you know, it's really important that we do work closely with elections offices, because the elections offices have to do the work of helping us educate the local communities as well. So I'm just going to say that it is really important. Also, I want to also say that it's important for us to work together too, as well, because these are intersectional issues, and you've heard some of them come up on this webinar, and I'm seeing in the Q&A, people are talking about specific populations. It's really important that we, as large organizations, work with special organizations that do reach these smaller populations. So it's important that we reach out to them directly and provide the same sort of assistance that we do to elections officials and the general community.
Right. Thank you very much. Nick, your take on election administrators, if you had a chance to, or you hope to?
Yeah, we've definitely been working with election administrators. You know, they can help make voting easier and more accessible for our communities, and we can also work together to engage our communities. For example, CalPERG is working with the LA County Registrar of Voters and the Secretary of State's office to get a second vote center at UCLA, and to host both an LA-wide and a statewide student voter summit to educate new voters on how to vote and educate admin and student organizers on how to do effective voter outreach. And we're also working with the Secretary of State's office to count students who register to vote at castudentvote.org for the Ballot Bowl, which is a competition between California schools to see who can register the most voters. So there's some good examples.
Yeah, there's some great examples. Brittany, you get to close us out. And once you're done, I will give us our thank yous and our send-offs, and we can all go out and continue the good work that we're doing. So take it away, Brittany.
Thank you so much. I really want to underscore everything that all my other esteemed co-panelists have said so far. If you can be a poll worker this November, it doesn't have to be on November 3rd. There's going to be a few days of early voting in most counties. So reach out, volunteer, especially if you speak a language other than English. You're very, very needed. Amplify information from your elections office to your networks. You are trusted messengers for your communities, and when people receive information from people that look like them or come from the same background or groups that they're familiar with, they are more likely to see it and to trust it. Amplify information to sources and places that your elections office might not be able to reach, and partner with them to do that. So locations like in jails or for people who are returning from jail or prison. And also tell county elections officials what your community needs. So VACs have already been mentioned. There's language accessibility advisory committees as well, voter outreach committees. So many counties have these and more all the time. So reach out to them and provide feedback about how they're reaching voters and what materials they're using.
Great, thank you. So that is at the end of our webinar. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I wish we had another hour to do this, but we do have work that we have to continue regardless. So, however, I do hope this is a chance for people who are watching to make some connections with organizations out there that are doing similar work or work that is in parallel, that we can help our own specific communities successfully access the voting booth this year. So again, thanks to everyone for joining us. I hope to see you all again. We will send all questions that were not answered to our panelists via email. So take also a moment. There's a survey link dropped into the chat. Please access that and fill that out when you can. It gives us a better idea of the kind of offerings in the future that will be of use to our network. I want to give a special thanks to our guests today, of course, everyone who joined us, our viewers, and especially our sponsors, our network partners all across the state of California, as well as the James Irvine Foundation and Democracy Fund, which we would not be able to do this without their support. You can visit our website, or meet with us on social media. We have a Twitter, a Facebook, and an Instagram account, 2 Twitters actually, Future of California Elections and Voters' Choice California. On our website, we will have upcoming events listed. We have some research studies. We just uploaded a new study from in partnership with the Center of Inclusive Democracy, as well as some data and other information you'll be able to access. We're planning for another webinar in October, and discussions are in progress for a potential later this month. And of course, our FAQs and social media toolkits are free to use and hosted on our website. Join us on Tuesdays, Social Media Tuesdays at 10 a.m., where we're going to amplify each other's messages to our communities. You can also get reminders from us. If you subscribe to, send us an email, hello@Future California Elections, and we will send you an e-blast Tuesday morning to remind you to join us. So I think that's everything. One last thank you to our panelists. Glad you were able to join us. So much good information that I wish we had time to dig into more of it. But those are conversations that can continue outside of the space and among different groups. Thanks again, everyone. We will see you at some other point, at some other time. Be safe out there.